Whenever you're ready.
All right, you want to fade this in?
And
Oh, I ended that too soon. Well, hey, welcome. If anybody's tuning in, welcome to Ceox on Thursday Night Social, on Udicci's Thursday Night Social. We are very grateful tonight. We have a new friend joining us, Dan. Dan is O'Shea, is that correct?
That's correct.
I appreciate you coming on. Dan's had participated in some conversations online with Sierra, who's I should be on the other side of the screen over there. That's my daughter. Say hi, Sierra.
Hello.
We're going to try to be really fair about this, but Dan did, admit sort of more or less to being a Ravens fan, and we're going to let that be okay for the night anyways. But hey, so welcome to Currency Games. So the first half of the Ceox show is these currency games, and really it's a matter of us more or less talking about how to be our best self in the marketplace against the backdrop of what's currently going on in the marketplace, which is these current what we call currency games. And then after, so that runs for the first kind of half hour of the show, and then afterwards, Sierra jumps on and takes over everything with caps and contract talk, where she talks everything we need to know about leading a quality Super Bowl winning team in the NFL, and hopefully also the Buffalo Bills. So that'll be on. Yes. Yep.
real quick, you're gonna have to turn your thing off
Oh,
for the echo.
Got the echo. How's that? Much better, isn't it? So Dan, earlier when we were talking, you brought up a book, and I think you called it 1990, the Reckoning in 1990, I think.
It was two books: the Great Reckoning, one of them, and the Great Depression of 1990.
So if you can, just kind of like for anybody who's listening, give it a background of what your takeaway was from those books.
Yes. Pretty much the summary is this, especially the one in the Great Depression of 1990, that I believe the book was written by Ravi Bashra. It was almost like gospel to me in reading this book when I first read it in the 1980s and late 80s, early 90s. And what he basically said was, since the late 1600s, he went back that far, and he had graphs, charts, everything, all the financials. And he basically said every 20 years, there is a financial correction that takes place, a natural financial correction. And in showing these charts, he said every time man, the powers that be, whatever, manipulated that natural correction from occurring, when it happened later, let's say it skipped 20 years because they financially manipulated the market so the natural correction wouldn't happen. Let's say 1720. I'm just throwing out a year.
Sure.
So 20 years later, because it didn't happen in 1720, the natural correction was even worse, and the charts showed this. So he said when it got to the point of the Great Depression in 1929, 1930, the natural correction was not allowed to take place for, I believe it was 60 to 80 years prior to that, which is why it was so brutal. You can explain different things like the leverage, the margins, and all that, but it still took a toll in the fact that every 20 years, the natural correction did not take place in the 40 to 60 years preceding that. So when I thought long and hard about that when we went into 1990, reading The Great Reckoning, which not only got into the financial situation, you know, our debt, it got into race issues, it got into a lot of things that got me thinking about the top 1%ers and how they're controlling the financing. But in moving into 1990 and then 2000, when we got to 2006, 2007, we hadn't had, I know we haven't had a natural correction since the Great Depression. And what happened with the Lehman Brothers and other banks when they went into the White House, a number of these bank leaders, so-called bank leaders, they went in to see George Bush. Basically, they walked out with a deal with the government that the government would support the banks for the first time in the history of our country. So what they did, and it took me right back to this book, The Great Depression in 1990, and it told me we were either headed to another Great Depression, which would have been made 1929 look like a walk in the park, but also, but not only that, when they made the deal with the banks, what happened was the natural correction that took place. So we're what? 2007. We are another 15 years, getting close to another 100 years. Whenever this correction does take place, it's going to be a very.
So hold on, Dan. I'm having some audio issues over here. Tim, are you hearing these audio issues?
Yeah, it's because you have a video up, Chuck.
You think what? But I'm not doing anything with the video. No. Okay, so let's see here. All right, let's try that. All right. All right, Dan, just let's try if that's what it was.
Yeah, so just to finish it up, so I'll repeat it, just that last part. When they didn't allow the natural correction to take place, and for the first time in our history, a government bails out banks, that told me when they walked out, they realized there was an internal situation that no one knew about, that there was going to be a devastating financial collapse. Yeah. Oh, that wouldn't have happened.
So with that, actually, while you're talking, what I want to do here, I just want to jump over because I think it's important. We like to play a lot with media, and you know, because it speaks to people differently. So what I'm going to do, I want to actually pull this up. If you're not familiar with this video, I would just want to kind of anybody who might be looking, and I tell people go look for this. Look for Keynes Hayek. It's a rap battle. All right, Tim, can you make this full screen? And let me make sure. Can you hear the sound?
Freddie.
Yep. Keynes.
Hey, listen, party at the Fed.
Already? 20 minutes.
Lobby.
John Maynard Keynes.
F.A. Hayek.
Yeah, we're opposed.
We oppose each other philosophically.
Oh, what'd I do?
In the same studio.
We've been going back and forth for a century.
I want to steer markets.
I want them set free. There's a boom and bust cycle and good reason to fear it. Play low interest rates.
No, it's the animal spirits. John Maynard Keynes wrote the book on modern macro. The man you need when the economy's off track. Depression, recession, now your question's in session. Have a seat and I'll school you in one simple lesson. Boom, 1929, the big crash. We didn't bounce back, economy's in the trash. Persistent unemployment, the result of sticky wages. Waiting for recovery? That's outrageous. I had a real plan, any fool can understand. The advice real simple, boost aggregate demand. CIG altogether gets to Y. Keep that total growing, watch the economy fly.
We've been going back and forth for a century.
I want to steer markets.
I want them set free. There's a boom and bust cycle and good reason to fear it. Play low interest rates.
No, it's the animal spirit. You see, it's all about spending. Hear the register cha-ching. Circular flow, the dough is everything. So if that flow is getting low, doesn't matter the reason. We need more government spending. Now it's stimulus season, so forget about.
All right, and I got to stop it right there because that's the big thing that we're talking about right here in these, let's call it the unnatural 20-year prop-ups. It's when you look at it, our entire economy, their global economy is everything. It's built on Keynesian economics, And every time we get to the point where you would have that downturn, they start turning on the pumps and they start feeding more debt into the system because it's currency. They've known for ages, this is not even a hidden thing. It's a well-known thing that Keynesian economics goes through these booms and busts, and the answer is always print more money. The real problem with printing more money is you can't just keep doing that constantly. And why can't we just keep printing money? I probably should have handed that off a little bit. Dan, why is it we can't just keep printing money?
Well, then you're back to a 1920 situation in Nazi Germany where the German mark became, you know, $1 billion. 1 billion marks couldn't buy a loaf of bread. So it just devalues your currency. So you can't keep doing that because it becomes worthless. That's it in a nutshell. You got to have something behind it that makes it a value. And when you just print it, it just means, you know, it's just like handing freebies out, and you just can't do it because then it's taken as valueless.
Hold on, did we? Oh, okay. So her camera's off. All right. So she's still there. Good. Is the audio okay right now, Sierra?
Yeah, it's really hit or miss. It's hit or miss.
Okay, so it seems like when I'm playing the videos that it may be causing too much of a drag. All right, we'll work on that. And I think it's important. So what I kind of like when we talk about currency games, and that's this first half, it's like what I would like people to understand is that there is this kind of game, and nobody likes to think about our financial I don't even call it well-being. Let's just call it our financial situation. Nobody likes to look at our financial situation as a game that is being played upon us. But that's exactly what this is you pull one lever, you turn one knob, you know, you spend some money over here, you spend some money over there, and they're trying to create this balanced economic system. But debt upon debt upon debt just becomes that unequal measure, right? It's just suddenly you have so much debt because you rely on cash flow. One of the plans of debt is to actually devalue currency so that you can pay back debt with inflated dollars. And it makes sense. If I could borrow something, you know, in 1950, if I could borrow $10,000 to buy a house, you know, that house today is going to be worth, let's call it, you know, 10 times that number. But what's the currency itself worth? And when I retire a debt with inflated dollars, you're actually always, it's almost like a lease on a car where you're never really out of debt. You're just sort of rolling the debt into the next cycle. And there's a weight that happens. And I think the crash, that natural crash that we want, this would be a great conversation. We have a gentleman who joins us on occasion. His name is Bruce Korber. He's an Austrian economist. Has written a book called Divine Economic Theory, a theory around it. And very much so. When man comes in and tries to manipulate the market and tries to give it a prop up, it's not like the next time the fall is just where we are and where it was. It's a much harder fall. It's a much harder fall when these cliffs, we basically get to financial cliffs, if you will. So what should people be thinking about right now as we're approaching this time where the game makers themselves are having to find new ways of playing the game? Did I lose you?
Lost you at the end.
Okay, so yeah, you know, you've read these books, you've done a lot of other studying. We were talking about this earlier. Right now, we know that the people who make the rules, whoever you want to call that, be the central bank or the infamous they, whoever that is, you know, they have to have a new game right now because their fiat system is collapsing. It's not exactly like speculative at this point. You may be able to prop up the fiat currency, but the writing's already on the wall that cryptocurrency is going to replace all of the fiat. Now, crypto can still be a fiat currency, but the actual dollar as we know it is going away. I mean, there's just no way that you can think that it's going to remain here for another 100 years, let alone it's probably gone in 5 years. It's probably gone in 10 years. I don't know the time, but that little paper dollar that we carry around, it's going away. So what would you tell people? Like, how should they be kind of preparing to win this game that they didn't know they were being played, that they were players in? And, you know, how can they go about putting themselves to win in this environment? Looks like I keep losing you. Okay.
So who's that question to?
It's to you. Yeah, Sierra will come back on a little bit. Yeah, I'm looking to you. What would you suggest to people? Where, like, knowing all that you know, all your experience in life, knowing where we are, what advice would you give people to position themselves, you know, to do good, to make sure that we're there for our neighbors, but also make sure that, you know, they're able to recover and make it through this significant economic tsunami that's heading here?
Well, the first thing I know I've done recently is I've moved from South Florida to South Carolina because we are closer to family. So families are going to have to circle the wagon. That's number one, what I think is going to have to happen.
That's right.
And you're seeing it a lot now. Second is diversity. I've started buying coins. I don't know how much that's going to help. You know, got stocks, options, you know, I do all that, but you know, you don't know what's going to happen with your money in the banks. You don't know what's going to happen when it's in your trading platform. So I don't know where that's going to go. And it is frightening to think that banks own your money, no matter where they're at. They own your money. And so that's why, you know, you have coins, you have, you know, maybe, you know, it's like Mike Burrow from The Big Short. You know, he's buying farmland, he's buying water.
Right.
That's his biggest asset. So if you can get out to areas where there's farmland, there's land, and I think that's why you're seeing a move from the big the suburbs and the cities out to more rural areas. I think you're seeing a mass movement out that way.
Yeah.
So, but you know, the question is fascinating because I've asked myself that for 30 years because I've seen the writing on the wall, and I just think it's going to get so bad that you don't know exactly, you know, especially those that don't, you know, are living paycheck to paycheck. How do they survive something like that when it happens? And that's a scary thought to me.
Which
so,
is about 50% of the country.
Right. Right. What are they going to do? Where are they? You know, I lived in South Florida for over 10 years, and you know, you see $250,000 cars pull up to you, and then you see 4 homeless people in the intersection. You know, and that's, you know, the great divide, the great middle class is basically gone, especially with COVID. I mean, it was already growing thin, but now it's almost obliterated.
Yeah, I think that that's a key thing for people to look into, to hold on to, is one of the reasons that the United States was an economic and is an economic powerhouse still is we had the largest middle class, you know, largely as measured across history. Let's just kind of go a real broad brushstroke there. Is it's the size of your middle class that speaks to the health of your economy. And the middle class has been shrinking big time. And you know, those who would be in the lower incomes, they're being given all these promises of, you know, $15 an hour jobs, but that $15 an hour is not even worth, you know, $7.50 pretty soon.
30, 40 years ago.
Right. It's like it's just not there.
Right. It's not. I don't know how people are existing and surviving, quite frankly, to pay they have to live with 3 or 4 friends. You know, we've gone to a service-oriented economy now in the United States, and living in South Florida, you know, a virus like COVID just has devastated that industry down there. It's restaurants, it's hotels, and these people were already just making $15 an hour, $17 an hour, but the way they were able to work was to work 60 hours a week. The problem coming back with COVID, and I hear a lot of thought process about, well, people just don't want to go back to work. the big problem is they don't want to go back to work at 20 or 30 hours. They can't survive 20 or 30 hours because their shifts are cut back, because they have every other table that is now served. They're only, these restaurants are only carrying 50% capacity now. That's sort of ended, but there's still, the people aren't coming back in droves to the restaurants, because when you're talking about a meal that, was, $8, $9 for a burger is now $14, $15, $16. People aren't going out as much. So it's not that people don't want to work. They can't afford to go back to work in a lot of instances because the hours and the shifts aren't there for them. So
and a lot of the jobs we keep hearing about are not your higher paying jobs. They're the lower paying jobs that the world kind of wants us to celebrate. Oh, look at all these jobs that are out there paying 15 to 20, 25 bucks an hour. I mean, the people who would sit there and go, you can't afford to live, they're not wrong that a minimum wage job does not pay the bills. I mean, there's a huge argument into whether it was already ever meant to pay the bills. And there's some great economic debates around the idea whether we should even have a minimum wage, which I tend to think not, but I also fall into the idea. I love the universal basic income idea as sort of a way of getting out of this really broken system that we'd have. It would be to somehow just over the course of a couple, 1, 2, 3 years, institute some sort of what we're going to have to expect to be a highly inflationary universal basic income as we switch to the new currencies. And let's actually begin rebuilding our currencies more correctly. I feel like, this big, huge correction that you're talking about is coming. There's no doubt about it. Now it's a matter of how does the system get rebuilt to better work for more people? Because we've had the knowledge for hundreds of years that what we're facing was coming again, and we just kept acting, ignoring it. So yeah, I think that I hate looking at it as a game, but I think for me, having come from the banking industry and really seeing the inside of, let's say, maybe the soul of that industry, it's maybe easier for me to look at it as a game, because I don't want to think that it's being perpetrated upon people intentionally, even though I'm pretty certain I know the answer to that. So I would tell people, look, it is a game, and you have to learn how to know your role, and you've got to be able to play your role in all of this. And we're going to go in and start talking about contracts and caps and as it relates to sports. But one of the things we want to look at is we're going to be talking about the general manager role tonight. So I want to kind of make this little transition, right, and say, if we look at where we are in, let's say, since the past 400 years, going to that book that you mentioned started in the 1600s, and I'm good with that. I mean, I think we didn't start really seeing central banks until around, I don't know, 1700s, and maybe a little bit earlier. The most successful central bank prior to United States was Britain. That's the reason that they were able to conquer the world. Most powerful weapon in an army is the central bank. Let's not doubt that for a moment. And, so I think what we can do now is that we can condense all of that. And it's there's been this playing field that's stretched out over years. And we have that when it comes to football. We've got this thing called a cap space that gets played out over the years. So one of the things I want to do as we make this transition, and tonight's theme is to know your role. And because all of this is meant to actually help us to be our best together, and at the heart of all of this is trying to learn from one another and from those around us how to be our best. I guess I would like to start with Sierra and then go to Dan. And when I say to know your role, what does that mean to you?
I think it means that everybody understands what their strengths and weaknesses are in a team and whatever the relationship is at that point. And you are able to best accentuate and best highlight your skills based off the role that you've been given. And it's having humility, which I think is a good trait to have.
Yeah, we talked about humility last week as being a key component to success. And earlier when we were talking about this know your role idea, it's easy sometimes to get outside of your role because maybe you think you could perform that role a little bit better than the person in the role, but the person in the role may be a little bit better all around. So, we may have a wide receiver who could throw a football and, thinks maybe they should be throwing the football at a certain time, but you still have a quarterback for that job who's got the ability to read the field. So it's important definitely to know your role. And, so Dan, if I were to say to you, what does it mean for somebody to know their role?
Well, I'm going to go back to basically what I've listened to one of the greatest linebackers in the history of the game. I won't say the greatest linebacker out of respect of other teams, but Ray Lewis, one of the greatest.
No, I think that he definitely is. I think he might have earned that one, right?
Yeah. So what he said was, and this was so important when he said playing Ravens football, was the fact that every player on his defense that was behind him, that was in front of them, they had a role, and their role was not only to play the position they were in, but make sure they had the back of every other player. And what he meant by that, and this was extraordinary, was don't go outside of your position and all of a sudden go shotgun by yourself and being caught out of position, because then you're hurting 10 other players. So it's knowing your role, not just for you, but for your other 10 teammates on the team. And that was profound, because that's what Ray Lewis and that's what Ed Reed, their whole concept was, is if you know your position, you play your position, you don't play out of position, you don't put your team in a position where they could be beat by going outside of that position, because you've got to answer to 10 other guys. So your role is not only contained for yourself, but it's contained into having the backs of 10 other guys too, and knowing that. So, and I think that goes back to also Bill Belichick, of course, in New England. I'm a big Bill Belichick fan only because he came from my home state, Annapolis, Maryland. And, that old adage he's got is play your game. He meant confine yourself to the game you play, not only for yourself, but for the rest of the team. So that's how I look at what it means to, with the word role.
And Bill Belichick's motto was always like, do your part, like do what your part is on this team. So
right.
He's a good coach for that. That's a good analogy.
No, I think that's excellent. I mean, so I wrote down here, like, don't play out of position. I think that's interesting. And to play your game. I think that's huge, right? Because once you learn what your game is and you can play your game well, and then the rest of your teammates start to figure out what your game is, and then they can play the game well with you, right? It becomes more of a handoff, a pickup, and a go from there. So this actually, know your role, started for us way back years ago. We did a branding development for a local credit union, and it was one of the statements we worked with them on. And the statement we came up for them with the know your role was to be a team player, to know your position and perform it well. Nothing great is ever accomplished alone. Learn to rely on your teammates and let them rely on you. So I think we're all kind of saying that same thing tonight, but I really love the idea of, don't play out of position, and, to play your game. Now, here's an interesting thing. Now, when we put that on the field, it's somewhat easier to see, right? When we put that on the field, we put Ray Lewis there, we understand what it means to play a linebacker, and we put Josh Allen in the pocket. We know what it means to play quarterback. But what does it mean to play your game and to play your role over a period of time with changing rules, right? Because the cap space, the cap game, is played over many, many years. There's some speculation that goes into that. So how do we actually now take our step above when we can look at ourselves playing on the field and we add a few more variables to it, which is time and I'll call it inflation that happens to the cap space as it goes. So how would you learn? Like, what do you think it would be important for a general manager of a football team? How could they play their role well with a little bit of a different twist? Same answers, right? But it's going to be a different perspective. So I kind of let who wants to take that one first?
So I think first things first, if you get a chance to have Tom Brady, who's willing to take pay cuts because he has a wife that makes almost $500 million every year, then okay, maybe that's fine. And then he accepts payments under the table. That's probably like step one if I'm a GM.
All right, step one of a good NFL GM: find a quarterback, a rich wife.
Married to a very rich wife. No, but really, I think this goes into play too. Is not. I think we talked about this last week too. Is like not thinking that your knowledge is above like proven statistics, and not doing things that are above proven statistics. So, for example, running back is probably one of the most dying positions within the NFL, and it's pretty. I'm sure there's some anomalies out there, but once you pay a running back, like you're hamstringing yourself. So like the Ezekiel Elliott contract is outrageous. Like the Cowboys should have never paid him that kind of money. Or if we're talking about what Saquon Barkley's about to make soon with the Giants, and the fact that they even drafted him number 2 just suggests that like that general manager thinks he's above science because statistics, because every statistic will show you that the NFL is a passing game, and all the rules within the NFL are geared towards a passing offense to help generate more excitement and to help generate more viewership in the end. I think that's really the ultimate goal of them, is to make money. So
hey, look, the any part of the game, the big game media, the media game, any of this financial game that we're playing, first off, it goes back to conversations we've had before, is to make the game a drug. In other words, if your game is Facebook, make sure I'm getting a notification to release a little dopamine. But if I can make that really exciting, and if I can have more excitement compressed into lesser time, I get the stimulation of being at that game. So I actually now make the rules of the game to make the game more addictive, which is very interesting, right? So,
right. Which, like, it goes to that, like, there is a reason that quarterbacks get paid the kind of money they do. It's because there's really only one on the field. Like, there's only one quarterback on a team that's gonna. I shouldn't say that for every team. In theory, one quarterback on your team, and he is like the guy. Like, everything on that team pretty much falls on his shoulders for one reason or not. So you have a game that is geared towards very much like passing excitement. So when I'm an NFL GM, I'm concerned first and foremost about, I'm trying to find a quarterback that's going to lead my team for the next 10 to 15 years. And if you happen to come across one in the draft, that's awesome. But guess what? Like, you're going to pony up money, because the Patrick Mahomes and the Aaron Rodgers and the Russell Wilsons and the Tom Bradys. I mean, Tom Brady is such an anomaly. Do not come around often. So when you get them, you take them. But then it's also recognizing, okay, now what do I have to do to make sure that this guy is successful? And so now I have to be able to build a team. And like I was talking about last week, is you have premium positions within the NFL. So that includes, like, quarterback is number 1 by far and large. On the offense, you want like at least one alpha, like an alpha wide receiver, and that's what Stephon Diggs is to the Buffalo Bills. The Ravens don't have that. Like, the Ravens do not have that on their team. Sammy Watkins, we all thought might be something, but they don't have that for Lamar Jackson. You need a left tackle, if not 2 tackles to be. And then when you talk about the defense, like defensive end, premium position, like everybody's trying to find that. So I think what's important is not thinking that you are above like what's proven. You know what I mean? Like, thinking, like, to be able to effectively within a constraint like a salary cap is not thinking that you are above it. So being Dave Gettleman of the New York Giants, he is 100% going to pay Saquon Barkley way over market price. And that's because he's like, well, he's such a good player. Like, that's great, but like running backs do not help like make teams win. It's a known fact that
Okay.
it doesn't happen.
So now I'm going to pretty much agree with all the stuff you just said, but now I'm going to push back a little bit and go over to Dan, who, you know, he was sharing online a little bit about, well, you don't put all your eggs in one basket with the quarterback, and I agree with you. I've got a good friend who lives up in Charleston. He's all into basketball, and this kid could tell you, you know, who's going to win and how they're going to win. Very at a high frequency of success because he's a statistician. I mean, these sports are so much about statistics, and you know, living in technology world. Like, I get that. Like, hey, an improvement of 20% in your CPU is huge. You know, so is 3%, and those things come into play. So the idea of building an entire team around around your most sort of your general, and who provides at least the initiation of most of the excitement. You've got to have a whole player, a whole package in that player. But then we can go back years ago and look at some other coaches with different philosophies, and going back to, and I just lost his name, was it Seifert, who really started focusing on the culture, right? He in the 49ers, was it Seifert or
was it Bill Walsh?
Walsh, sorry, yeah,
Walsh?
I think it was Walsh, who brought to into when he got to the 49ers, the entirety, if you read anything on him, was you focus on the, you know, you focus on the culture, you focus on the culture, you focus on the culture, and the culture breeds the success. And ultimately, what we have in Brandon Beane is a culture advocate. He's a master of culture. And he might be playing the game as you're talking about with the quarterback. He might also be playing it. But his whole idea is focus on the process, focus on the process. The process is about building culture amongst that team to create a winning team that can sort of reach beyond the quarterback. And I think that's sort of in the direction of what you were talking about online, Dan, right?
Yeah, and you know, to me, I don't disagree with anything she said realistically. I mean, to me, the role of the general manager now is about balance, and they better have a good balance because, you know, let's just say you're paying Josh Allen now. What is it? Was it 40 million? Is it over 40 million? Over
40.
Well,
I think it's just enough to survive.
Yeah. Now, if there's a balance there because the salary cap is going up, obviously it went down or it didn't go up last year because of COVID. If it went up, you know, then they have that balance to spread that out. I wholeheartedly agree that the running back era, you know, they're pretty much wiping it out because of, and to me, I think the primary reason is because of these so-called defenseless receivers. When you used to have your Nitschkes and all of those linebackers that could just devastate a wide receiver going over the middle, and then they go over the middle with elephant arms after that, what they've just done by several hits is eliminate part of the offensive game. You've now eliminated that. Wide receivers can go anywhere. And what that did was, if you look at, and I agree wholeheartedly, running backs are almost obsolete just because of the fact that, you know, when you see a running back game being played, it's almost like, well, let's hand off this play just for the sake of handing off. It's not like your Bill Parcells era of just that's the predominant offense anymore. So when you've got a Bill Belichick who's running a Brady and Edelman and all these guys across the middle, he's going to get a first down one of two ways. He's going to get it, number one, by pass, or he's going to get it by penalty, because he knows if there's a penalty on a defensive player or what, the way they've tightened up the defense against the receivers, he's going to get a first down either by catching the ball to a swift receiver or a penalty.
Or getting some BS like, oh, I hated that about Julian Edelman.
I can't. That's part of the game. I love the game, but I can't stand where it's going in that regard, because Bill Belichick, again, is brilliant.
He's so smart.
Brilliant. Yes, and that's why he did it. He was the first one to just say, to hell with the running game. I'm just going to pass it. And he had the great quarterback to do it, and he just put in those slots and the two tight end receivers that could catch the ball. the rest of the NFL was done. Now, granted, he was in a very weak NFL East. I mean, AFC East,
yeah.
but you know, that's like a perfect storm for Bill Belichick. But to get back to a general manager, and I alluded to this with you two earlier, it's a fine line with Josh Allen. Now, do I think they should have paid that as much? It's possible. I'm not going to say no yet. We don't know because the salary cap went up. My position is this, because being a Ravens fan, we got Jackson, Lamar Jackson.
They're going to pay him more. They're going to pay Lamar Jackson more.
And you know what? He hasn't proved he's a passer. And, you know, we talk about it, they don't have any wide receivers, but my concern is even if they get the wide receivers in, is he going to get the ball to him? You know, that's my concern. And to me, it's a legitimate concern because he hasn't absolutely proved that. Is he an incredible athlete? We know he's an incredible athlete. But Tennessee in the playoffs 2 years ago showed how you defend him. He wasn't as successful last year.
Well, the Bills did too in the playoffs. The Bills had a pretty good plan for him in the playoffs this year.
Exactly. The Bills did. So, you know, the Ravens went 14. They can win in the regular season. Can he get them to the promised land just on his legs? I don't know, but that's where that balance comes in. It's where talent comes in. Does he have the arm? I don't know yet. And that's why I'd be hesitant to pay him more than Josh Allen. I think Josh Allen is an incredible talent. I think he can lead Buffalo to a Super Bowl. I still have my doubts about Jackson because this is critical.
I do think that offense really hamstrings him though. Like, and that's another role is like you would think they would be able to I think he might be a better passer than the offense he suggests.
Well, I don't know about that, but let's put it this way. If he's in a 2-minute drill and he's down by 7 or 6 points or 5 points, I'm not so sure he's got that passing talent to bring him back. Now, you may be right that it's wide receivers, lack of wide receivers, but, you know, I just that's a question. It's a big question mark. So the point is, heading to this salary, do you pay him what you pay him? And if it's more than Josh Allen, you've got to build talent around you too. We saw that with Tom Brady, and you're exactly right. He's got a wife that's making what, $500 million a year.
Yeah,
a quarterback like Tom Brady can afford to do this. But on the opposite end, do you really need a wife that makes $500 million a year? When, let's put it this way, let's just say Lamar Jackson does give up a little bit of his wages, signs a 5-year contract for maybe top 10, and he's got talent around him now. Well, guess what? Now he's going to probably be continuing in the playoffs, so he's making extra playoff money. He's going to be making marketing money because being in the playoffs, you have that exposure, so you're going to be able to make money in other ways that if you are literally a New York quarterback who's 4-12 every year, you're not getting that much exposure because you're not winning. You're not in the playoffs. You're not on national TV. You don't have the Monday night games. You don't have the Thursday night games. You don't have the Sunday night games. So no, you're not going to be marketable. But if you just take a little bit less of money, build talent around you because the cap dictates that. But now because you've got better talent around you, number two, you may not get as injured as much because you got the 2 tackles that you need to protect you. And now all of a sudden you're in the playoffs every year. You got the exposure. You're making money in other ways. So that's my whole thought process, that if you're a good general manager, do something like that. Think out the box a little bit like that.
But also, what I think good general managers are, good at, because I can't think of another word, is being able to manipulate the cap. So Josh Allen, Josh Allen's contract is massive. But the way they've structured it is like the 2 largest cap hits come at that time when the cap is going to skyrocket. But like for the next 2 years, I think they're still both under $10 million. So you're still able, because like he might be getting all this money from like whatever signing bonuses I think don't count against the cap. So the minute he signed that contract, he got $100 million signing bonus. And so that does not count against cap for this year. Right. And so what good general managers can do is manipulate that cap. So I fully expect Ozzie Newsome isn't there anymore, right? And whatever Lamar Jackson's going to get, that GM over there for the Ravens is very good, and they're very good at drafting. So I anticipate there'll be whatever contract they divvy up.
I'll work it out. I agree. Yeah, I agree. They've done a great job in being able to time it to renegotiate other contracts in Baltimore, and I think that's why they've remained playoff contenders for a good portion.
So let me ask, when it comes to the actual GMs, right? If, like Sierra, you're saying some of them can manipulate the contract. I mean, are there, what games do you think a Brandon Beane has? What does he bring to his game that some other GM doesn't? I mean, I can't imagine there's a lot of like contract, like something so unique in the contract says, all the agents are talking, and that's going to, like, the legal way of structuring something is probably fairly known by everybody in the NFL at this point, my guess. So, what allows a Brandon Beane to say manipulate the system in a way that others don't? Now, we just talked about that, Belichick seemed to do that and other coaches weren't doing the same thing. So maybe there's something to knowing how to play your role better. I don't know. But yeah, how do we look at that? How do we kind of say that what seemingly is widely available knowledge is practiced better by one GM than another?
You want me to go first on that one?
Sure. Yeah.
I specifically think, and this is when the cap really started having an issue with players, is the Ravens have an incredible player personnel recruit. They look at talent across the board, college, everything. And they know when they lose a Terrell Suggs, or they lose a Ray Lewis, or they lose, even Joe Flacco, whoever it is, they have a knack, except with wide receivers, of course, but they have a knack of bringing in players at critical positions where they're losing them because they've been so successful, that I think it really comes down to those GMs that have a great scouting department, and they know that they can fill this guy in. This guy's got great potential. So I think a large part of it with these GMs is not only being a great mathematician, but having the skills to set up a great scouting system and knowing how to evaluate that talent. Because when you're losing a multi-million-dollar player because of the cap, they've had very good success in replacing them with someone who's just almost making minimum for the first year or two, and then they go up a little. So I think it's a combination of mathematician and player scouting and personnel, and know how to make that move that can be as subtle as possible without suffering a great loss.
I wrote that down as like deep. How did I write this? Deep access to talent. And it sounds like what and you bring up a great point. I think we see this with the Bills, is the Bills have a lot of young talent, and they can kind of pay those people less. And then they might have somebody who's like, 99% is good and 98% is good, and they can kind of come in and feed behind them. And then they just readjust their game plan to make up for that 1% or those two, maybe it's a 5%, but it sounds like a really good GM knows how to work with a coach who can change the game plan with the talent that's available.
Oh, that's a great point. That's an awesome, great point, to change the talent. But, let me mention one thing real quick because I was an old Baltimore Colt fan. And when the Ravens came in after 10 years of not having a football team, it was interesting to see how they were built. And I was amazed at how they were built, because I didn't realize how important it was until you saw the whole process play out. But the Ravens were, because they were the former Cleveland Browns, they were in the same division as the Pittsburgh Steelers. And there was a scout and I think he was in management at this point, that just died just a week or two ago with the Pittsburgh Steelers. He was one of the first, I think he was the first African-American to be in a scouting development management role in that position. In the late 60s, the Pittsburgh Steelers and the players loved him because of him, he was almost the reason that the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Steel Curtain and that whole era existed. And then when I was listening to this man and about him, I realized why they were so successful. He was the first one who ever, instead of drafting on need, they drafted the best player available, physical specimen. And that's what he started doing. And then you saw the Pittsburgh Steelers evolve. Well, Ozzie Newsome, he was the great tight end for the Cleveland Browns, and he became the general manager for the Baltimore Ravens. He had the same identical philosophy. And as a matter of fact, that's why I think we quickly, within 4 or 5 years, became competitive with the Steelers in that division, is because instead of taking the best positional player out of need, they started drafting the best physical specimen in the draft at that point. And so that to me was eye-opening.
It's an interesting one. I've heard over the years, all the business books and whatnot, they tell you to hire character because you can teach a skill. And I largely believe that that's true. And that's sort of what we're talking about here is, there is talent. And there's a difference between a talent and a skill, right? It's like the talent, the skill, or the talent simply means that you can do the skill well, almost naturally, but you can kind of still learn the skill. I could learn to catch football. And look, when you're talking about hiring into, say, corporate America, or, just trying to build a healthy management team, I've heard time and again the strategy: you hire character and you teach skill. And the idea there is that when it comes to truly developing leadership or anything else around you, you really want to be able to trust the people, right? We're going back to that trust thing. And I think that that's where character comes in. So it's interesting if we just sort of tie the football idea of talent and character together, from the marketplace versus the football field. But Sierra, how about, let's see, we've got a couple minutes. Any closing thoughts on tonight's topics?
I was just thinking that, I made the comment, oh, don't be above statistics, but Brandon Beane was being above statistics when he drafted Josh Allen. So
yes, he was.
Yeah, I guess it's funny because it's obviously you do want to have that good eye for talent, but I think with the Bills, and I think the Ravens are probably in the same cut of cloth, or the same cloth, but they do value character pretty heavily. So they do not want to bring anyone into their locker room that is that's going to infect it in any way, if you will. And just going back to Josh Allen's contract, Brandon Beane, from the second he came into Buffalo, said, I want to be able to draft well, develop, and I want to pay my own guys. And so if he were ever to Matt Milano, perfect example, 5th round guy that was drafted, they developed him. And then he ended up getting paid pretty good as an outside linebacker. He never made a Pro Bowl. He's never been All-Pro, but he's a very good linebacker. And what would it look like if Brandon Beane told all these guys, hey, we're going to let this really good player walk out the door that we developed, even though I've been telling you I want to draft, develop, and pay you guys, So I think that's another good thing, is Brandon Beane is just a very good communicator too. And I guess agents have said that he is very transparent in his negotiations. He does not hide anything. He's just very transparent. So,
and I think that that's an important piece. That transparency is trust, right? I'm not trying to create a win-lose situation. I'm not trying to put the ball in my, I'm not trying to put the transaction in my favor. I'm trying to put the transaction into our favor. Mm-hmm. Right. So a very transparent, this is what's going on. And you don't have to have all the doubts and the questions, which can come down from the top when you have that kind of transparency. Look, this is who we say we are. This is what we say we're going to do. Now we're going to do it. And that's definitely speaking to character. And I think that really speaks to, again, culture. And I think when you develop the culture properly, you can actually pay people less, right? Because they're going to want to be in an environment where they're appreciated, they're trusted, and they're winning, and they're, recognizing their absolute best. But I see Tim just came on. That's our cue. So, hey, Dan, thank you for joining us tonight. I mean, did you have fun? Is it okay?
No, it was great. It was a blast. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, man, I'll reach out to you. Maybe we can grab coffee sometime, get to know you a little bit more, and come back on some point. We're just growing all this right now, but at this point, we actually go on and we join a group of pirates who are creating a blockchain project for permaculture, and they do a little social kind of gathering. I mean, if you are so inclined, we'd be happy to, you're welcome to go join this. They're characters, they're fun, but we do have to end this episode at 9 o'clock and kind of jump over there. So Tim, if he wanted to join us with the pirates, how are we going to do the pirates?
Well, let's go ahead and fade out, and then we'll talk and figure it out.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right. Well, fade
like
out
a
first.
flat initiation thing that I'd have to go through or something like that?
You have to walk the plank.
This is all right. This is all just walking together as we figure this out.